So let's get into food and dining. You've co-written the book, The Perfect Meal, The Multisensory Science of Food and Dining, in the search for the perfect meal, which you call the gastronomic satisfaction. So tell me, is there anything really like a perfect meal? Can it really be studied, as human experience and expectations are so different?
It's something that people haven't really studied before, because for you it might be fish and chips by the seaside. Maybe it is for me, or it might be a picnic, or it might be going to the middle of the sort of Swedish forest for a meal in a very exclusive, very hard to get to restaurant. Well, especially hard now it's closed down. But so every person probably has a slightly different perfect meal, and yet I think it's not a difficult question to answer. When you ask people, what was your best meal ever? People will sort of come up with something. And then it is different between different people, okay? But we are different as humans, and yet psychology exists as a science, and we can study people, the average kind of response, and the sort of factors that influence, that play in. And so I think it's worth trying to study it, despite the differences, and look for any commonalities that one might find. And that might require you to sort of cluster people into the gastro tourists versus the comfort eaters versus that that idea of, you mentioned sort of expectation, people's expectations are different. Well, that's part of the perfect meal, I think, what you expect to happen or don't expect to happen. And I give in the start of the perfect meal for me, going to Le Chateaubriand in Paris, probably a decade ago now, being recommended by the chef who was working in the lab at the time, but he'd recommended a different restaurant the day before, and it wasn't wasn't all that great. So we went to this one, knowing nothing about it, and it sort of blew you away because your expectations were low. It just looked like a bistro, but then once you got inside, suddenly these dishes kept coming out that it was like a collective of young gastronomic chefs, and dish after dish sort of came out that was really interesting and delicious, and it was that better than you expected that made that. And I think very often it can be better than you expect can be part of what constitutes the perfect meal. Through to the other bit that I gave is, I'm here in Colombia, and my parents and family have come various times. So we've taken them around, shown them all in our fancy restaurants in Bogota, the capital, or in the coast. And when at the end of the trip, we sort of say, well, what was your best moment? What was the best meal we've had on this sort of trip? And everyone says it's not the fancy restaurants in the capital. It's this little shack in the middle of a roundabout in Cartagena on the Colombian Caribbean coast, with all the taxi drivers honking their horns, and it's just prawn cocktail effectively in a plastic cup with a plastic spoon on a plastic chair in the middle of a roundabout, hot and sweaty. It's sort of all wrong in so many different ways, and yet for all of us it was, without question, the best thing. And is that then about the emotion of being then together with your family, and then you can sort of maybe extract the principles and say, okay, these things are important. Expectation is important, anticipation is important, but also I think when you look at it closely, those great meals, the best meals, they lasted a few minutes, a few hours at best, and they're gone. And yet the memory of that experience stays with you for years, in some cases. And hence, then it becomes a whole question of, maybe I don't really care what your perfect meal is. Actually, I care about your memory of the perfect meal, because that's what stays with you. That's what will determine whether you recommend it to somebody else, go back. And of course, then as a psychologist, knowing that our memory plays tricks on us all the time. Again, these sort of systematic, predictable tricks that maybe make sense in some way. But by knowing that, then you can try and create real experiences with more stiction, as the marketeers call it, that will then reside in memory. And take that thought, how do we create truly memorable meals? And that gets you into primacy effects and recency effects, and multi-course tasting menus that have more hooks for sticky memories to be created.
Regarding the memory, I would say that when I was living in London and missing Sweden, I could go to IKEA and have a meal, and my friends is like, you can go to the fancy restaurant in town, but I'm like, yeah, but it's home, right? It's memories, even if it's that simple. It's the memories that comes with it, and also like a little bit comfort food, right? Yep. As it reminds me.
Meatballs, isn't it? Meatballs. their thing. And don't they serve something like, I saw some statistic that they serve more meals than anyone in the world, bar McDonald's or something like that.
I'm
Something crazy.
Sure they do.